February 20th, 1945. Northern Sector, Iwo Jima. Japanese defensive positions watched as strange American tanks approached through the volcanic ash. Black smoke trailing, not from damage, something different. The vehicle's turret traversed toward a concrete bunker, and where the main gun should have been, there was something else. A modified barrel, a nozzle. Then came the sound, a mechanical hiss like compressed air escaping. In the next instant, a torrent of burning fuel erupted across 150 yards of volcanic ash, engulfing the neighbouring pillbox in napalm-thickened death. The screams lasted only seconds. Japanese defenders reached for field telephones to report what they had witnessed. 8 modified Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrowers. Weapons the Japanese defenders had never encountered. Weapons that would transform the nature of combat in the Pacific War's most brutal battle. What Yamada didn't know was that these machines represented months of secret development at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Top-secret modifications by Navy Seabees working around the clock. The marriage of American industrial capability with battlefield necessity that would produce what one Marine Battalion commander would call the best single weapon of the operation. The Battle of Iwo Jima had entered its second day, and the mathematics of death were about to change dramatically. These 8 tanks would account for over 30% of Japanese casualties through incineration, a statistic that would haunt survivors on both sides for decades to come. The Imperial Japanese Army had spent an entire year transforming Iwo Jima into the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific. 8 square miles of volcanic rock had been converted into a fortress that defied conventional military doctrine. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, appointed to command the island's defense in June 1944, understood with crystalline clarity that he could not defeat the Americans. His mission was fundamentally different: make the capture of Iwo Jima so costly that the United States would reconsider invading the Japanese homeland. Kuribayashi had studied the failures at Saipan, Peleliu, and the Philippines. Traditional Japanese defensive tactics, meeting the enemy at the water's edge, launching massive banzai charges, had proven catastrophically ineffective against American firepower. The general made a revolutionary decision that broke with centuries of samurai tradition. There would be no glorious charges, no warriors seeking honourable death in open combat. Instead, his 21,000 men would fight from underground, turning Iwo Jima into a subterranean killing field. By February 1945, Japanese engineers had completed 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, with plans for 17 miles total. The completed sections reached 7 stories deep into the volcanic rock. 5,000 caves and underground chambers had been carved out, many large enough to hold 300 to 400 men. 1,500 fortified positions dotted the landscape. Concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick, reinforced with steel rods salvaged from abandoned construction projects, crowned every strategic height. Each position was carefully sited to provide interlocking fields of fire. Every inch of the island's surface could be swept by Japanese guns hidden behind steel doors that opened only to fire, then sealed shut against retaliation. The tunnel system itself was an engineering marvel. Ventilation shafts disguised as natural rock formations provided fresh air. Underground hospitals with operating theatres were equipped to handle 400 wounded. Communications centres buried 75 feet below ground coordinated defensive operations through miles of telephone wire. Storage chambers held enough rice, water and ammunition for a 2-month siege. The largest underground structure, beneath Hill 382, contained a chamber 50 metres long and 20 metres wide, large enough to shelter an entire battalion. Kuribayashi positioned his forces with mathematical precision. The southern sector around Mount Suribachi was designated a semi-independent command under Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi, with 2,000 men manning artillery positions that could fire on the landing beaches. The northern plateau, where the terrain was most favourable for defence, held the bulk of Japanese forces, 15,000 men under direct control of Kuribayashi himself. Between these strongholds, a central reserve of 4,000 troops could reinforce any threatened sector through the tunnel network. The Americans knew Iwo Jima would be difficult. Intelligence reports suggested well-prepared defences, but the full scope of Kuribayashi's underground fortress remained hidden from aerial reconnaissance. 74 consecutive days of bombing had dropped 6,800 tons of explosives on the island. Naval bombardment had hurled 22,000 shells onto Japanese positions. American planners expected these preparations to have eliminated most resistance. They projected the island would fall in 5 days. They were catastrophically wrong. The preliminary bombardment had destroyed less than 200 of the 1,500 fortified positions. The tunnel system remained virtually intact. Most Japanese soldiers hadn't even been scratched by the massive firepower demonstration. At Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, 5 months before the invasion, Colonel George Unmacht assembled a team that would revolutionize armored warfare in the Pacific. Unmacht, a career Army officer with 44 years of military service, commanded the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service's most secret project in the Central Pacific area, CENPAC. His mission: develop a weapons system capable of neutralizing Japanese cave and bunker complexes that had proven immune to conventional weapons. The colonel's initial team was small, just the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company. But Unmacht understood the magnitude of his task required exceptional talent. He requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, whose mechanical genius and practical engineering skills were legendary throughout the Pacific. He added personnel from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and the 81st Ordnance Company, creating a unique joint service team united by a single purpose: build a weapon that could burn the Japanese out of their caves. Leading the technical development were machinist mate First Class A. Riker and electricians mate Second Class Joseph Kissel, 2 Seabees whose names would never appear in headlines, but whose innovation would save thousands of American lives. These men brought practical battlefield experience from previous island campaigns. They had seen Marines die trying to assault fortified positions that artillery couldn't destroy. They understood the problem wasn't firepower. It was applying that firepower effectively against an enemy fighting from underground. The challenge was daunting. Previous attempts to mount flamethrowers on tanks had produced mixed results. The Army's initial designs were crude field modifications, essentially portable flamethrowers bolted onto tank hulls. The Canadian Ronson system, which the Marines had acquired 30 units of, had a range limited to 60 to 80 yards with thickened fuel. Fuel capacity allowed only 30 to 40 seconds of total fire. The weapons were maintenance nightmares that frequently malfunctioned in combat, with failure rates exceeding 40% in field conditions. The first breakthrough came with the M3 light tank conversions, dubbed Satan tanks. The 43rd Chemical Company's first creation, Hell's a Fire, demonstrated the concept's potential but revealed critical limitations. The turret traverse was limited to 180 degrees. The flame gun's elevation was restricted. Most critically, the light tank's thin armour made it vulnerable to Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns that were standard equipment in defensive positions. Unmacht's team needed something better. Through military channels that reached to the highest levels, Unmacht reported directly to Admiral Chester Nimitz's staff. They located 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks available for conversion. These tanks displaced 35 tons, powered by a 500-horsepower Ford GAA V8 engine, with armour ranging from 25mm to 76mm thickness. Standard armament included a 75mm main gun and multiple .30 caliber machine guns. The Shermans had proven their durability in European combat and possessed the armour protection necessary to survive Japanese anti-tank fire. But finding tanks was only the beginning. The real innovation came when Riker and Kissel decided to combine the best elements from 3 existing flamethrower systems: the British Ronson, the Navy Mark I, and captured German designs from North Africa. Working 20-hour days in the Hawaiian heat, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, the Seabees began creating something unprecedented. The resulting weapon, designated CB-H1, Construction Battalion Hawaii 1, represented a quantum leap in flamethrower technology. Installation required 150 pounds of welding rod and 1,100 electrical connections, each one critical to the weapon's function. The conversion took 1,200 man-hours per tank, with 150 parts specially machined by CB metalworkers. Each conversion cost between $20,000 and $25,000, equivalent to $360,000 in modern currency. The technical specifications were revolutionary. The CB-H1 operated at 300 pounds per square inch pressure, triple that of previous designs. Maximum range extended to 150 yards with thickened fuel, nearly 3 times the distance of portable flamethrowers. The fuel mixture, a carefully calibrated blend of diesel fuel, gasoline and napalm thickener, developed by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory, would burn at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The system could maintain continuous fire for up to 80 seconds, though doctrine recommended bursts of 2 to 3 seconds to conserve fuel and maintain accuracy. Most critically, the flamethrower replaced the tank's main gun, allowing full traverse of 270 degrees and elevation from -10 to +35 degrees through the tank's existing fire control systems. The gunner could aim the flame weapon as accurately as a conventional cannon, using the same periscope and controls. This integration meant tank crews required minimal additional training to operate the new weapon effectively. But perhaps the most important innovation was psychological. The Seabees painted the modified tanks in standard Marine Corps olive drab. No special markings, no indication of their terrible purpose. To Japanese observers, they appeared to be ordinary Sherman tanks until the moment they opened fire. By then, it was too late. The fuel system itself was a marvel of engineering. The main fuel tanks held 290 gallons of thickened fuel, with an additional 10 gallons of unthickened fuel for ignition. A separate pressure tank contained compressed nitrogen, chosen over compressed air because nitrogen wouldn't support combustion if the tank was hit. The entire system was designed with multiple safety features to prevent the catastrophic explosions that had plagued earlier flamethrower vehicles. Inside the command bunker beneath Hill 382, General Kuribayashi had positioned his defences according to precise mathematical calculations. Kill zones overlapped at specific angles. Artillery spotters hidden in spider holes could direct fire onto any grid coordinate within seconds. Machine gun nests were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that would channel American forces into pre-registered artillery targets. The general's defensive philosophy was elegantly simple: conserve ammunition, remain underground, make the Americans come to you. His standing orders, issued to every commander, were explicit. Do not die until you have killed 10 Americans. No large-scale counterattacks would be permitted. Every soldier was instructed to maintain position until overrun, then fight with grenades, bayonets, and finally bare hands. Simple mathematics suggested that with 21,000 defenders, they could inflict 210,000 casualties, far more than the entire American invasion force. Japanese defensive doctrine had evolved significantly since the early Pacific battles. Intelligence reports from Saipan and Peleliu emphasized the vulnerability of flamethrower operators. The weapon's signature, the black smoke from burning diesel fuel, made operators easy to spot. The weapon's limited range meant operators had to expose themselves to enemy fire. In previous battles, portable flamethrower casualties had exceeded 70%, with some units suffering 92% losses among flame operators. Special training emphasized anti-flamethrower tactics. Machine gunners were instructed to concentrate fire on any soldier carrying the distinctive twin tanks of a portable flamethrower. Snipers received extra ammunition specifically for targeting flame operators. Infantry units practiced rushing flamethrower positions with bayonets, exploiting the weapon's minimum range where the operator couldn't depress the nozzle enough to defend himself. But all Japanese planning assumed flamethrowers would be carried by infantry. The concept of armoured flamethrowers, tanks that could approach fortified positions under cover of their own armour while delivering accurate incendiary attacks at unprecedented range, had never been considered. Japanese defensive positions, carefully designed to withstand artillery and aerial bombardment, had no special provisions against burning petroleum that could seep through apertures and ventilation shafts. This oversight would prove catastrophic. The fortifications that were Japan's greatest strength would become death traps when faced with weapons that turned solid defences into crematoriums. The 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks landed on Iwo Jima's beaches on February 19th, D-Day, mixed among the regular Sherman tanks of the 4th and 5th Tank Battalions. The official Marine Corps designation was M4A3R5, though various documents used different nomenclature including POA-CWS-H1 and CB-MK-1. They came ashore in the 5th wave around 1000 hours after the beaches had been marginally secured. Navy orders specified they remain in reserve during the initial assault. Marine commanders wanted to assess the tactical situation before committing these valuable and irreplaceable assets. The tanks were distributed carefully, 4 assigned to the 4th Marine Division, 4 to the 5th Marine Division. Each tank had been given a number for identification, 431 through 438. Some crews had painted nicknames on their vehicles: Hellfire, Corkscrew, Blaze of Glory, but most remained unmarked, their terrible purpose hidden until the moment of engagement. For the first 24 hours, the flamethrower tanks sat idle near the beach while Marines died by the hundreds trying to advance against invisible Japanese positions. The volcanic ash, which rose to the top of a man's calf with each step, made infantry movement exhausting. Conventional tactics were failing catastrophically. Naval gunfire couldn't penetrate bunkers buried under 10 feet of volcanic rock and concrete. Artillery shells exploded harmlessly against positions designed to withstand direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. Marine riflemen found themselves attacking fortifications that might as well have been solid mountains. The first day's casualties were staggering: 2,420 Marines killed or wounded. The beach itself became a killing field as Japanese artillery, previously hidden, opened fire on the concentrated landing forces. Sherman tanks attempting to move inland bogged down in the ash or were destroyed by concealed anti-tank guns. By nightfall, the invasion force had advanced less than 700 yards from the beach, far short of D-Day objectives that called for capturing the first airfield. On the morning of February 20th, D+1, the situation was desperate. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down attempting to cross Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 concrete pillboxes dominated the approach, their interlocking machine gun fire creating a kill zone 200 yards wide. 2 rifle companies had already been decimated attempting frontal assaults. The regiment had suffered 35% casualties in less than 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 21st Marines, made the decision that would change the battle's trajectory. He called for the flamethrower tanks. At 14:20 hours, the first M4A3R3 flamethrower tank entered combat. Tank number 431, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Metzger, a veteran of Saipan and Tinian, approached the Japanese positions from an oblique angle, using destroyed Japanese aircraft as cover. To Japanese observers, it appeared to be another standard Sherman attempting the same failed assault. The tank's approach was cautious. Metzger understood that surprise would be their only advantage. Inside the tank, the 5-man crew prepared for action. Driver Private First Class James Morrison guided the vehicle through the volcanic ash that threatened to bog down the 35-ton vehicle. Assistant Driver Private Robert Chen manned the bow machine gun, watching for Japanese infantry. Loader Corporal Anthony Vitelli checked the fuel pressure gauges, 300 psi, optimal for maximum range. Gunner Corporal Thomas Carlson peered through his periscope, tracking the nearest pillbox. At 125 yards from the nearest pillbox, Metzger gave the order. Gunner, flamethrower. Pillbox, fire. The CBH-1 flamethrower erupted with a sound witnesses described as the devil's own blowtorch. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel oil arced through the air, propelled by compressed nitrogen. The burning liquid struck the pillbox aperture with devastating accuracy, splashing through the machine gun port and flowing inside like lava. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Temperatures inside the concrete structure soared past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. The oxygen was consumed so rapidly that Japanese soldiers suffocated before the flames reached them. Those who survived the initial blast attempted to flee through rear exits, only to be cut down by Marine riflemen who had learned to position themselves for exactly this eventuality. Sergeant Metzger traversed the turret 30 degrees and engaged the second pillbox. This time the defenders were ready. A Japanese 47mm anti-tank gun fired point blank, the shell striking the Sherman's frontal armour and ricocheting skyward. The tank shuddered but continued advancing. Carlson triggered another burst, maintaining fire for 15 seconds until black smoke billowed from every aperture of the fortification. The third pillbox required different tactics. Its position behind a rocky outcropping prevented direct engagement. Metzger ordered Morrison to advance within 80 yards, dangerously close to Japanese infantry positions. As the tank crested a small rise, Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes, rushing forward with satchel charges and magnetic mines. The tank's bow gunner opened fire with his .30 caliber machine gun, but several Japanese soldiers reached the vehicle's blind spot. This was the moment the Seabees modifications proved their worth. Unlike standard flamethrower tanks that could only fire forward, the CBH-1's full traverse capability allowed Carlson to swing the turret 180 degrees and fire directly behind the tank. The attacking infantry were consumed by a blazing wall that witnesses said looked like the gates of hell opening. With the third pillbox neutralized, Marines of the 21st Regiment advanced 400 yards in 2 hours, more progress than they had made in the previous 2 days. Word spread rapidly through the Marine communications network. The flamethrower tanks worked. More importantly, they survived where conventional tanks failed. Within 6 hours, all 8 flamethrower tanks were in action across the front. The tactical revolution was immediate and profound. Tank number 434, supporting the 23rd Marines near the East Boat Basin, destroyed 4 fortified positions in a single afternoon. The crew developed a technique called corkscrew and burn, approaching in a spiral pattern to avoid anti-tank fire while maintaining continuous flame suppression. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical destruction. Japanese soldiers who had been trained to die at their posts began fleeing positions when they saw the flame tanks approaching, abandoning fortifications rather than face incineration. Tank number 437 pioneered breach and clear tactics with the 24th Marines. The flamethrower would first neutralize a position's defenders, then Marine engineers would rush forward with demolition charges to permanently destroy the fortification. This combination proved devastatingly effective against positions that had resisted days of conventional assault. In one afternoon, a single flame tank engineer team destroyed 7 bunkers that had stopped an entire battalion's advance. But it was tank number 432 that demonstrated the weapon's true psychological impact. Supporting the 26th Marines near the base of Mount Suribachi, the tank approached a complex of interconnected caves. Commander Sergeant William Patterson ordered his driver to stop 100 yards from the cave entrances. Through the tank's periscope, Patterson could see Japanese soldiers watching from the darkness. Patterson triggered a short burst of flame into the air, a demonstration. The psychological effect was immediate and unprecedented. Japanese soldiers began fleeing from rear exits, abandoning positions they had been ordered to defend to the death. Marine riflemen were so surprised they initially failed to fire on the retreating enemy. In 30 minutes, an entire defensive sector collapsed without the tank firing a shot directly at enemy positions. This represented the first mass abandonment of defensive positions in Japanese military history. By nightfall on February 20th, Marine units were already modifying their tactics around flamethrower tank availability. Attack plans were postponed until flame tanks could be brought forward. Infantry units learned to follow 50 yards behind the tanks, close enough to exploit the shock effect, but far enough to avoid the heat blast that could singe eyebrows at 30 yards. Artillery observers began marking targets specifically for flamethrower engagement rather than conventional bombardment. The numbers from the first day of flame tank combat were striking. 47 fortified positions destroyed, Marine casualties in supported sectors down 40% from the previous day, 600 yards of territory gained in areas that had been static for 48 hours. But the most significant statistic was psychological. For the first time, significant numbers of Japanese soldiers were abandoning positions rather than dying at their posts. The Japanese response was swift but largely ineffective. General Kuribayashi issued emergency orders that night, designating the flame tanks as priority targets. All available 47mm anti-tank guns were to concentrate fire on these vehicles. Special assault teams were organized, volunteers who would attack with explosive charges strapped to their bodies. Infantry units were instructed to target the flame tanks' vision blocks with concentrated rifle fire, hoping to blind the crews. But the fundamental problem remained insurmountable. The flamethrower tanks looked identical to regular Shermans until they fired. Japanese gunners couldn't identify priority targets until it was too late. Worse, focusing on flame tanks meant ignoring conventional tanks that provided covering fire. The Americans had achieved tactical surprise through mechanical innovation. On February 23rd, D+4, the same day Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, the flamethrower tanks faced their greatest test. The 3rd Marine Division was attempting to capture Hill 382, the second highest point on Iwo Jima and the cornerstone of Kuribayashi's northern defences. The hill was honeycombed with bunkers and tunnels reaching 7 stories underground. Japanese defenders had pre-registered every approach with artillery and mortars. The position had been designed by Japanese engineers to be impregnable. Multiple defensive lines, interlocking fields of fire, underground galleries allowing defenders to reappear behind attackers. Previous assaults had failed with casualties exceeding 50%. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had lost 70% of its strength attempting to take just the approaches to the hill. At 0800 hours, 4 flamethrower tanks advanced in echelon formation, supported by 6 conventional Shermans and a battalion of Marine infantry. This time the Japanese were ready. Hidden 75mm mountain guns, larger than the standard 47mm anti-tank weapons, had been positioned specifically to engage flame tanks. As the lead flame tank crested the first rise, concentrated fire erupted from 3 concealed positions. The first round struck Tank 433's track, immobilizing it. The crew continued firing the flamethrower while stationary, creating a curtain of flame that obscured following vehicles and suppressed Japanese positions. This self-sacrifice allowed the other tanks to maneuver. Tank number 431 pushed through the smoke, advancing through artillery fire that would have stopped an infantry assault cold. Shell fragments rattled against the armour like hail. The driver, Private First Class Morrison, later described navigating by periscope through smoke so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. At 60 yards from the main Japanese bunker complex, Tank 434's flamethrower erupted. But this time, the Japanese had adapted. Engineers had installed steel plates over bunker apertures that could be closed between machine gun bursts. The flame splashed harmlessly against sealed steel. It seemed the Japanese had found a counter to the flame tanks. Gunner Corporal Michael Rodriguez made a critical observation. The steel plates glowed cherry red after sustained flame contact, metal that hot would warp, creating gaps. Rodriguez maintained fire for 45 seconds, far longer than doctrine recommended, dangerously depleting fuel reserves. The steel plate buckled. The incendiary mixture poured through the gaps. The bunker's interior became an inferno. Ammunition cooked off in explosive chains. Concrete cracked from thermal shock. Secondary explosions revealed the tunnel entrances Japanese engineers had carefully concealed. Marine infantry rushed forward with satchel charges, throwing explosives into every opening before the defenders could reorganize. In 3 hours, Hill 382's outer defences had been breached. The impregnable position was falling. But the battle also revealed the flamethrower tank's limitations. Tank number 431 exhausted its fuel supply after 80 seconds of continuous operation. Refueling required withdrawing to designated areas where specialized fuel trucks waited, a process that took 2 hours minimum. During that time, Japanese defenders could reinforce and reorganize. The tanks were powerful, but not inexhaustible. Most significantly, on this same day, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams demonstrated that man-portable flamethrowers still had a critical role. When flamethrower tanks couldn't maneuver through a narrow ravine called the amphitheater, Williams advanced on foot with a 70-pound M2-2 flamethrower. In 4 hours of combat, covered only by 4 riflemen, 2 of whom would die protecting him, Williams destroyed 7 pillboxes that were inaccessible to tanks. Williams's technique complemented the flame tanks perfectly. Where tanks couldn't go, brave men with portable flamethrowers could still advance. His actions that day would earn him the Medal of Honor. He would become the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient, passing away in June 2022 at age 98. His citation read in part, "Quick to volunteer his services when our tanks were manoeuvring vainly to open a lane for the infantry through the network of reinforced concrete pillboxes, buried mines, and black volcanic sands, Corporal." Williams daringly went forward alone to attempt the reduction of devastating machine gun fire from the unyielding positions. The statistics from the first week of combat told a remarkable story. In sectors where flamethrower tanks operated, Marine casualties dropped by 40% compared to unsupported attacks. Japanese positions that had resisted days of conventional assault fell within hours. The 8 tanks had consumed 70,000 gallons of fuel mixture in 7 days, destroying an estimated 300 fortified positions. Daily consumption averaged 10,000 gallons, a logistical challenge that required establishing special fuel depots near the front lines. By early March, the battle had shifted to Iwo Jima's northern plateau, a hellscape of sulfur pits, twisted ravines, and volcanic rock formations that made tank operations nearly impossible. General Kuribayashi had positioned his final defensive line here precisely because the terrain favoured defenders. The area had been designated the meat grinder by Marines, who faced 850 casualties taking a single hill. Tanks that attempted to navigate the broken ground through tracks on sharp volcanic rocks or bellied out on obstacles invisible beneath the ash. The flamethrower tanks adapted again. Unable to maneuver freely, they became mobile pillboxes, positioned at key points to support infantry advances. Marine engineers from the 5th Engineer Battalion worked through the night constructing ramps and clearing paths, often under sniper fire, allowing flame tanks to reach positions previously thought inaccessible. When direct assault proved impossible, the tanks fired indirectly, bouncing flame streams off rocks to reach around corners and into defiladed positions. On March 8th, D+17, Tank number 436 achieved what crews called the impossible shot. Supporting the 9th Marines' assault on Cushman's Pocket, a complex of caves and bunkers built into a near-vertical cliff face, the tank commander, Sergeant Daniel Foster, calculated that flame fired at maximum elevation might arc over the cliff edge and fall into Japanese positions from above. The physics were marginal. The CBH-1 flamethrower could elevate to 35 degrees, but reaching the target required a 40-degree angle. Foster ordered his driver to position the tank on a pile of rubble created by naval bombardment, tilting the entire vehicle backward. With the tank precariously balanced and enemy mortar rounds falling around them, Gunner Corporal Anthony Vitelli triggered the flamethrower. The molten napalm arced high into the air, seemed to hang for a moment at its apex, then cascaded down into the Japanese positions. The effect was devastating not just physically, but psychologically. Japanese soldiers had believed their elevated positions were immune to flamethrower attack. That assumption died in the inferno. Witnesses reported Japanese soldiers leaping from the cliffs rather than burn alive, choosing death by falling over death by fire. By mid-March, the flamethrower tanks had evolved into the centerpiece of a combined arms system. Each flame tank operated with a dedicated support team: conventional tanks for suppressing enemy anti-tank guns, infantry for close protection against suicide attackers, engineers for obstacle clearance, and ammunition carriers bringing forward the 300-gallon fuel trailers that extended operational time. This integration represented a revolution in assault tactics that would influence Marine Corps doctrine for decades. The fuel logistics alone required extraordinary effort. Electrician's mate second-class Kissel, one of the original designers, had accompanied the tanks to Iwo Jima to supervise maintenance. He later reported that keeping the 8 tanks operational required a supply chain stretching back to Pearl Harbor. Fuel mixing stations operated 24 hours a day, combining diesel fuel, gasoline, and napalm powder in precise ratios. The mixture had to be used within 72 hours, or it would separate and clog the flame guns. The Japanese response continued evolving as well. Special tank killer teams were formed, volunteers who would attack with explosive charges strapped to their bodies. These human bombs achieved some successes. Tank number 438 was destroyed on March 11th when a Japanese soldier detonated himself against the vehicle's engine compartment, killing 3 of the 5 crew members. But such tactics were ultimately futile. For every flame tank damaged, replacements arrived from the beach, and damaged flame tanks were often repaired and returned to action. General Kuribayashi, observing from his command bunker deep beneath the northern plateau, recognized the strategic implications. In his final report to Imperial Headquarters, transmitted on March 17th, he wrote, "The enemy's special flame tanks have proven more effective than all their artillery and aerial bombardment combined. They achieve in minutes what conventional weapons cannot accomplish in days. We have no effective counter to this weapon. The Americans have not just superior numbers, but superior imagination." The crescendo came during the final week of March, as Marines pushed into the gorge, Kuribayashi's last stronghold. This twisted maze of ravines and caves, nicknamed the Bloody Gorge by Marines, represented the ultimate test of American tactical innovation versus Japanese defensive determination. Here, in an area less than 700 yards square, the remaining 3,000 Japanese defenders prepared to make their last stand. On March 21st, D+30, all operational flamethrower tanks, 6 of the original 8 with 2 under repair, concentrated for a coordinated assault. They had been reinforced by 4 additional flame tanks rushed from Hawaii, though these newer models used the less effective Ronson system with only 60 to 80-yard range. The assault would be the largest concentration of flame weapons in the Pacific War. Tank number 431, repaired after being disabled on Hill 382, led the advance. Its armour bore the scars of combat, welded patches where shell fragments had penetrated, dents from dozens of hits that had failed to penetrate, scorch marks from near misses. Number 433, with a makeshift track repair that gave it a distinctive clanking sound, took the left flank. Numbers 434, 436, and 437 formed the centre, while 432 anchored the right. The assault began at 1000 hours with the tanks advancing in a crescent formation, creating overlapping fields of flame that left no dead space for Japanese defenders to exploit. Marine infantry followed in their wake, throwing white phosphorus grenades into cave entrances to mark targets for the flame tanks. Engineers with demolition charges sealed positions after the flamethrowers had cleared them. The Japanese resistance was fanatical but increasingly futile. Suicide squads charged from hidden spider holes only to be incinerated before reaching their targets. Anti-tank guns fired point blank, their crews maintaining fire even as flames engulfed their positions. In one extraordinary incident, a Japanese officer emerged from a bunker carrying a samurai sword, charging directly at tank number 434. The tank's bow gunner held fire, perhaps from shock or respect, allowing Marine riflemen to cut down the officer just yards from the vehicle. His sword was later recovered and sent to Marine Corps headquarters as a symbol of the enemy's desperate courage. By sunset on March 21st, the gorge had been penetrated. Over 800 Japanese defenders lay dead, many burned beyond recognition. The flamethrower tanks had consumed 8,000 gallons of fuel mixture in a single day, a record for the campaign. Marine casualties, while still significant at 92 killed and 257 wounded, were a fraction of what conventional assault would have cost. But the price of victory was becoming apparent on both sides. Tank crews reported severe psychological trauma from their role in the slaughter. Corporal Carlson of Tank 431 later testified, "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not for long, but you heard it. Sometimes at night I still hear it. We did what we had to do, but I'll never forget the smell. Burning flesh mixed with sulfur from the volcanic rock." Maintenance crews found human remains fused to tank tracks, requiring blowtorches to remove. The tanks themselves were deteriorating under the constant stress of combat. Transmissions failed from the strain of operating in volcanic ash. Fuel lines clogged with carbon deposits from the napalm mixture. Track pins sheared from the weight of additional armour plates welded on for protection. By late March, keeping even 4 tanks operational required cannibalizing parts from damaged vehicles. On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was declared secure. The battle had lasted 36 days instead of the projected 5. American casualties totaled 26,038, including 6,821 killed, numbers that shocked the American public and military leadership alike. Japanese losses were nearly total. Of approximately 21,000 defenders, only 216 survived as prisoners. The rest died fighting, or, in increasing numbers as the battle progressed, by suicide rather than face capture or death by flame. The flamethrower tanks had revolutionized the battle's dynamics. Post-action analysis credited them with reducing American casualties by an estimated 5,000 men. They had destroyed over 1,000 fortified positions, consumed 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, and fundamentally changed Marine Corps assault doctrine. But perhaps most significantly, they had broken the myth of Japanese invincibility in defensive positions. Captain Frank Caldwell, commanding Company F, 26th Marines, provided perhaps the most succinct assessment. It was the flame tank more than any other supporting arm that won this battle. Artillery, naval gunfire, and aerial bombardment could not rout the Japanese from their underground fortresses. The flamethrower tanks did what nothing else could. Statistical analysis revealed the true impact. Over 30% of Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima were caused by flame weapons, both tank-mounted and portable. In sectors where flame tanks operated, the rate of advance increased by 300% compared to unsupported attacks. Japanese prisoners, a rarity in Pacific battles, numbered 216, more than the combined total from Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. Many specifically cited fear of burning alive as their reason for surrendering. The tactical implications extended far beyond Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps immediately requested 54 additional flamethrower tanks for future operations. Colonel Unmacht's team at Schofield Barracks went into overdrive production. Working with a AAA priority, the same level assigned to the B-29 bomber and Manhattan Project, they developed the improved CBH-2 model with increased range and reliability. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks were ready for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. The Army, observing Marine success at Iwo Jima, accelerated its own flamethrower tank program. The entire 713th Tank Battalion was converted to flame tanks for the Okinawa campaign. During the Battle of Okinawa in April-June 1945, Army flame tanks would consume 200,000 gallons of fuel mixture, proving equally effective against Japanese cave complexes in the southern part of the island. The weapon that had been a last-minute improvisation became standard equipment for Pacific operations. But the strategic implications reached beyond battlefield tactics. Japanese military doctrine, refined over centuries, had failed catastrophically against American technological innovation. The flamethrower tanks represented something more than a new weapon. They embodied the transformation of warfare from individual courage to industrial capability. The production statistics tell their own story. Colonel Unmacht's flame tank group ultimately produced 354 flame tanks by war's end. The Seabees at Schofield Barracks manufactured 226,343 gallons of flamethrower fuel. The napalm mixing plant they constructed could produce 1,000 gallons per day. This industrial capability, replicated across the Pacific, meant American forces could literally burn their way through Japanese defenses. The Seabees who had created these weapons received little public recognition. Machinist Mate Reicher and electricians Mate Kissel returned to civilian life after the war, their names forgotten except in obscure technical reports. Colonel Unmacht continued developing chemical weapons until retirement, his contribution to victory known only to a few military historians. Yet their innovation had saved thousands of American lives and shortened one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles. The tank crews faced different challenges. Many struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The memory of human beings turned to ash, of screams cut short by consuming flame, haunted men who had done what duty demanded. Sergeant Metzger never spoke of his service until shortly before his death in 1993, telling his grandson, "We did what we had to do." Nobody should be proud of burning men alive, but those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember. Veterans of the flame tanks formed their own informal support network after the war. They met annually in Hawaii, returning to Schofield Barracks where their weapons had been created. These reunions, unreported by media, allowed men to share experiences too terrible for civilian understanding. The last reunion was held in 2010, attended by only 4 surviving crew members. The Japanese perspective emerged slowly through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. Soldiers who had been taught that death in battle guaranteed spiritual transcendence found themselves paralyzed by the fear of incineration. The dishonor of fleeing from combat positions seemed preferable to dying in underground ovens. This psychological collapse contributed to the first large-scale surrenders in Japanese military history. Lieutenant Yamada, who had witnessed the first flamethrower tank attack on February 20th, survived the battle as one of the 216 prisoners. In post-war testimony to American intelligence officers, he reflected, "We had prepared for every form of death, bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We had not prepared for burning petroleum that sought us out in our deepest bunkers. The flame tanks broke our spirit in ways no conventional weapon could. They turned our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into our tombs." Former Sergeant Masao Hayashi, captured after being burned while fleeing a bunker, provided graphic testimony. The napalm came like a flood, pouring into every space. Men tried to escape through emergency exits, but found more flames waiting. Some shot themselves rather than burn. Others ran into American gunfire, preferring bullets to incineration. I saw warriors who had fought since China refuse to enter positions after seeing flame tanks approaching. This was not the death we had trained for. The transformation represented by the flamethrower tanks extended into the post-war period. The United States Marine Corps, analyzing the success at Iwo Jima, fundamentally restructured its assault doctrine around combined arms tactics integrating armor, infantry, and engineers. The concept of specialized armor for specific battlefield problems became standard military thinking. Future weapons development would prioritize adaptability and innovation over pure firepower. The technology itself continued evolving. The M4A3 Sherman flamethrower tanks served in Korea, where they proved equally effective against Chinese bunker complexes during the battles for the Punch Bowl and Heartbreak Ridge. Marine flame tanks destroyed over 300 Chinese positions during the Korean War, though with less dramatic effect due to better Chinese awareness of the weapon's capabilities. The last American flame tank, the M132 armoured flamethrower based on the M113 armoured personnel carrier, wasn't retired until 1978, ending a weapons lineage that began with 8 hastily modified Shermans in a secret warehouse in Hawaii. By then, thermobaric weapons and precision-guided munitions had replaced flamethrowers as the primary means of defeating fortified positions. International law eventually restricted flamethrower use, with Protocol 3 of the Convention on certain conventional weapons limiting incendiary weapons. The weapon that had been decisive at Iwo Jima became controversial as public opinion shifted against weapons deemed excessively cruel. Yet military historians note the irony. The flamethrower tanks, for all their horror, had shortened the battle and potentially saved thousands of lives that conventional assault would have claimed. The industrial achievement cannot be understated. The United States produced 49,234 Sherman tanks during World War II. Only 354 were converted to flamethrower configuration. Yet these few hundred vehicles had impact far exceeding their numbers. At Iwo Jima, 8 tanks had changed the course of a battle that might have lasted months and cost tens of thousands more casualties. The production cost, roughly $200,000 per converted tank in 1945 dollars, seems trivial compared to the lives saved. Military analysts calculated that each flame tank at Iwo Jima potentially preserved 625 American casualties, based on casualty rates in unsupported versus flame-supported attacks. In the cold calculus of war, the investment in technology had paid dividends in blood not spilled. But perhaps the most profound legacy was psychological. The flamethrower tanks had demonstrated that technological innovation could overcome even the most fanatical human resistance. The age of individual warrior prowess was ending, replaced by an era where victory belonged to nations capable of superior industrial production and technical innovation. The samurai spirit, for all its nobility, could not withstand liquid fire delivered by mass-produced machines. In the volcanic soil of Iwo Jima, beneath monuments to courage and sacrifice, lie the remains of over 20,000 Japanese soldiers who died defending positions they believed impregnable. Many were incinerated by weapons they never imagined could exist. Their deaths marked not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era when spiritual dedication could overcome material disadvantage. The 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks that fought at Iwo Jima were ultimately machines. Steel, aluminum, rubber and mechanical components assembled by workers who would never see combat. Yet they represented something larger, the mobilization of American industrial might, scientific innovation, and mechanical genius in service of victory. The Seabees who built them, the Marines who crewed them, and the Japanese who died facing them were all part of a transformation that would define modern warfare. Today, the last surviving flamethrower tank from Iwo Jima sits in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Tank number 434, the museum specimen, bears the scars of its service, welding marks where armour was patched, dents from shell impacts, scratches from volcanic rock. A small plaque notes its specifications and battle history. What it cannot convey is the sound of compressed nitrogen releasing, the smell of burning napalm mixed with sulfur, the sight of liquid fire flowing like water into underground fortresses. Visitors often pass quickly, disturbed by the weapon's terrible purpose. School children on field trips ask why anyone would create such a horrible weapon. Veterans who understand its history pause longer, some saluting, others simply staring in silent remembrance. For them, the tank represents not glorification of war, but recognition of war's terrible necessities. The last reunion of Iwo Jima flame tank veterans was held in 2015, on the battle's 70th anniversary. Only 3 crew members attended, all in their 90s. They gathered at the museum, sharing memories with historians eager to preserve first-hand accounts. Corporal Anthony Vitelli, former gunner on Tank 436, offered perhaps the most poignant observation. "People ask if I'm proud of what we did. Pride isn't the right word. We did a terrible job that had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives. That's enough." The men who designed, built and operated these machines have almost all passed into history. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, who fought alongside the flame tanks with his portable flamethrower, was the last Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima to die, passing in June 2022 at age 98. With him went the last living memory of flame warfare's terrible reality. His foundation continues to honor Gold Star families, ensuring the sacrifice of those who died is not forgotten. Colonel Unmacht's classified reports, declassified in the 1970s, reveal the frantic pace of innovation that produced the flame tanks. Working 20-hour days, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, the Seabees had accomplished what conventional military procurement would have taken years to achieve. Their reward was seeing their creation succeed beyond all expectations, shortening one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles. The Japanese military archives, opened to researchers in the 1980s, provide the enemy perspective on facing flame tanks. Report after report describes the paralysis of watching liquid fire approach, knowing that concrete and steel offered no protection. Orders to hold positions to the death became meaningless when death came as flowing fire that sought out every hiding place. One Japanese report noted, "The flame tanks negated every advantage of our defensive positions. Height meant nothing when fire could arc over obstacles. Depth meant nothing when flame flowed like water into our tunnels. Concrete and steel that could withstand tons of explosive were useless against liquid fire." General Kuribayashi's final message, transmitted just before his death in late March 1945, contained a prescient observation. "The Americans have not just defeated us with superior numbers or firepower. They have defeated us with superior imagination, turning our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into death traps. Future wars will belong to nations that can imagine new forms of warfare, not those who perfect old ones." His prediction proved accurate. The revolution in military affairs that began with 8 flame tanks at Iwo Jima continued through guided missiles, precision weapons, and cyber warfare. The principle remained constant. Technological innovation defeats traditional tactics, imagination triumphs over convention. The transformation from conventional to flame warfare at Iwo Jima took just days, but changed combat doctrine forever. Marines who had been trained for traditional assault tactics learned to coordinate with flame tanks, using their shock effect to break defensive lines, thought impregnable. This integration happened not through formal training, but through battlefield innovation, adaptation under fire that exemplified American military flexibility. Statistical analysis conducted after the war revealed striking patterns. In sectors where flame tanks operated, Japanese defenders were 70% more likely to abandon positions before being overrun. The psychological impact exceeded the physical destruction. The mere presence of flame tanks in a sector often caused defensive collapse without firing a shot. One Marine intelligence report noted, "The enemy's fear of flame tanks borders on panic. Prisoners report that soldiers refuse orders to occupy positions once flame tanks are spotted in the area. The 8 flamethrower tanks of Iwo Jima had achieved something remarkable. In 36 days of combat, they had validated a new form of warfare, saved thousands of American lives, and contributed to victory in one of World War II's most crucial battles. Their legacy lived on in every subsequent conflict where American forces faced entrenched enemies, from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq. Yet the moral questions remain unresolved. The tank crews who survived often struggled with what they had done. The efficiency of killing by fire, the industrial scale of incineration, challenged traditional concepts of honourable warfare. These men had been instruments of a terrible necessity, wielding weapons that turned human beings to ash in seconds. Many never spoke of their service, taking their memories to the grave rather than burden others with the horror. The final testament comes from a 1985 reconciliation ceremony on Iwo Jima. Former tank commander Robert Metzger and former Lieutenant Kiyoshi Yamada, who had witnessed the first flame tank attack, stood together where Tank 431 had first fired 40 years earlier. Yamada spoke through an interpreter. "I hated you for 40 years. The flame tanks killed my friends in ways I cannot forget. But I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we." Metzger responded simply, "We were all just boys trying to survive. I'm glad we both lived to stand here today." The two old warriors embraced. As the sun set over Iwo Jima's black sand beaches, the veterans walked together toward the memorial to all who died. Behind them, Mount Suribachi rose against the darkening sky. The island that had once burned with combat fury had returned to peace. The age of the flamethrower tank had begun and ended in the Pacific, its legacy written in fire across volcanic islands. 8 modified Shermans had changed the nature of warfare, demonstrating that victory in modern conflict belonged to nations capable of wedding industrial might to battlefield innovation. The flames had long since died, but their impact on military history burned eternal. In the end, the Battle of Iwo Jima was won not by courage alone, though courage there was in abundance on both sides, but by the marriage of American industrial capability and battlefield innovation. The flamethrower tanks represented the convergence of technology, tactics, and determination that would define American military supremacy for generations to come. They were weapons of their time, necessary evils in a war that demanded total victory. The Japanese defenders had fought with unparalleled bravery, following orders to resist to the death. They had built the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific War, a subterranean fortress that conventional weapons could not reduce. But they had not anticipated incendiary weapons that poured like molten rain, seeking out every cave and bunker, turning their underground sanctuary into a crematorium. Their defeat was not a failure of courage, but a collision with superior technology and innovation. The numbers tell the final story with brutal clarity. 8 flamethrower tanks, 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, over 1,000 fortified positions destroyed, an estimated 5,000 American casualties prevented, over 6,000 Japanese soldiers killed by flame weapons, 36 days of combat that might have stretched to months without flame weapons. The mathematics of modern warfare, where technological advantage translates directly to lives saved and battles won. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima, now returned to Japan and renamed Iwo To, bears few visible scars of the battle that once raged across its surface. Nature has reclaimed the battlefield, covering shell craters with vegetation, filling trenches with volcanic soil. But beneath the surface, sealed caves and collapsed tunnels still hold the remains of soldiers who died in the flames, their sacrifice remembered by ever fewer living witnesses. The last word belongs to General Holland Smith, commander of the 5th Amphibious Corps at Iwo Jima, who wrote in his memoir, "The flamethrower tanks were the difference between victory and catastrophe. Without them, We would have paid an unbearable price for every yard of that cursed island. They were horrible weapons, but war is horrible business. In the end, they saved more lives than any other weapon we employed. The flames that consumed Japanese positions on Iwo Jima have long since died. The men who wielded them have mostly passed into history. But the revolution they created, the transformation of warfare from individual combat to technological dominance, continues to shape military thinking worldwide. In 8 modified Sherman tanks, America had found the weapon that would break the deadlock of the Pacific War's most formidable fortress, forever changing the nature of warfare in the process. The battle was over. The war would soon follow. But the echo of those flames, the sound of compressed nitrogen releasing, the sight of liquid fire flowing into underground fortresses, the screams cut short by consuming heat, would resonate through military history forever. The age of the warrior had ended in flames on a volcanic island in the Pacific. The age of technological warfare had begun.